last we talked, we did many of the really special runs of all time, but now we're getting into the absolute cream of the crop, the greatest runs we've ever seen, players that just dominated the game in truly special ways. We're into the special run category. We decided Chickeny qualified for that. We'll see how it goes for the rest of this. Yeah, we have the special runs, the top runs, the elite runs, and the GOAT runs left to go. And I think we'll make it all the way through. And of course, when we look at a run, I'm now going to start putting it at the top because it's unlikely to land lower down. But you can check out the prior video or, wait for the times where I scroll to see how others compare rather than stick the new runs on the bottom and then figure out where they go. And yeah, let's get to it. So the next run we have is Slash of Time 2010 to 2016. This is not peak Slash of Time. Peak Slash of Time is 0809. However, he does just keep on winning about 2/3 of his games against quite good opposition. Yeah, just for a really long period of time. And last time I was really valuing that this went for like 60 games compared to Chickeny, 3% higher for 40 games. Now, once we adjust for opposition, I think Chickeny's run certainly looks better. This first new number here, I talked about this last time, but that is the ELO performance. That is adjusted for opposition. What level of play was this? That's opposition with knowledge of, hey, so-and-so has been playing badly recently, or so-and-so has been playing well. It should adjust not just to how strong your opponents are in general, but how strong they have been leading up to the time you played them. This second number is the number I'm actually valuing a bit more because it takes that performance, but it values it for how long you sustained it. Because it says basically, what rating am I 100% confident, 99.9% confident this player is performing at a level better than? Like, there's some randomness. That's the level they actually performed. But if we were looking at their true talent, what are we just incredibly confident they're at least the level of? And the more games they've played at this level, the less it will drop off from this first number to the second number. And I'm mostly valuing the second number here. Now, if we look at this run, I still think it is underrating length of performance, right? I do not think Reye's 16 tournament run is more convincing that it's above a 65% win rate than Slash, or, this high a win rate than Slash's 60 games, right? So I still think it's kind of underrating longevity. And that probably means this Smokes run, it's 70 games, man. Yeah, I have this Smokes run too low. We're going to move Smokes up. And Piggy's is 56. Those are both too low, but I think they're in the right category. So I'm going to leave them as is. That said, Slash of Time's second best run here looks clearly, weaker than Tezuka's. And probably lands, somewhere around here. But it's 60 games. It's 60 games. That said, I'm going to put it here, but I'm going to say all three of these longer runs, let's move all three of them up. Because even though I used that second number to try to credit longevity, I don't think it did so enough. What I'm actually going to do is put them here. I do think they're in the right category, but I don't think they jump up to the level of Chickeny's run. That's maintained over 40 games, and I think Chickeny's run is at a higher level. So I'm going to drop Slash's second best run into the great run category, which is still excellent. And again, it's not his best run. But I do think Chickeny's is the best we've seen once we look at opposition. Let's see how Kazik does. This is Kazik's peak run where he made 2 finals. He goes 17-7 for a 2270, 2142. Is Reye expected to go 5-3 in the next 8 games? Yeah, and he actually did go 5-3 in the surrounding games, right? We have another appearance of Rayaminator, I think. Yeah, here, where that's okay, that's not quite a 5-3 win rate. That would have to be 15-11. So it's pretty close, but you can see the comparison between Kazik and Reye. And Reyes' higher scores are there for a reason. That's interesting. Okay. Um, Turds actually just clearly scores better over the, you know, slightly larger period of time. So this is going to fall a bit. Kazik is no longer going to be in the special run category here. Gets harder and harder to move up because a lot of the reasons people got insane win rates was they happened to draw somewhat easier opponents. Uh, you know, makes sense. That said, I think there is the rating inflation thing I talked about last time, and it was harder to play higher rated opponents in 2006 to 8. Okay, next we have Meta 0506. Now, Meta, like Reyes' run, is much shorter. There's some drop offs around it. I thought it was most flattering to give the short run, but that means that the win percentage here is something we got to be a little skeptical of. And actually, we see it here. This 11 and 2 only grades out, especially given competition. Though he had tough competition, he kept losing to Delhi. Possibly both losses there to Delhi. But yeah, I think it grades out as better than Reye, but I'm not convinced enough to put it over the much longer runs of Slash Smokes and Piggy. That feels right to me. And I think it's in the great run category. Yeah, I'm happy to drop it into great from special. Again, Chickeny's run, it's saying it's sure he's like 20, at least 2200 level. You know, some of these runs are 2200 level, right? Chickeny's run is like, I think, significantly more impressive than these shorter runs. And yeah, I'm happy to have it as the only special run so far. But you can see how many absolutely all-time great players are in this category. Turds is here twice. You know, it's not a bad category to be in. Possibly by the time we're done, we'll have fewer categories than we did before. We'll have a lot of the specials and great runs seem to be pretty similar once we adjust for level of opposition. Okay, next up is Bren's tremendous 0506 run, happening at the same time, basically as Meta's, but lasting longer. 11 and 2 versus 17 and 5. One stretched it out a bit more, and yeah, it's close. I think Bren's ends up by this measure as the worst of the Meta Reye runs. Bren runs. I think we're going to put it here. Again, you might devalue Reyes because that was mostly closed. You might not. That's up to you. And you might say, you're underrating 0506. That was a stronger era than you think. The ratings being lower than then is misleading. Bren and Meta are better here. Yeah. I'm trying to give you the information so you can adjust what you see to fit your own preferences. And now we have reached Delial's third best run. God damn, that man has done so much. This is kind of like Slash's run, right? He plays 60 games at a 65% win rate, and, these are very comparable. These are relative down periods after absolute peaks before it, but these down periods are tremendously strong. Delhi's looks like it grades out just a little bit stronger than Slash's, but I think we're going to drop it into the great run category. I think Chickeny's is not just the best we've seen, but the best we've seen by a clear margin. But, look at Delhi here. This is Delhi when he was like not in one of his two biggest peaks. This is him between peaks. This is a valley, right? That's insane. That's so good. And the final run in this category, I think we're going to end up scoring pretty low, but I really respect it because it lasted 68 games. And the thing about rating inflation is it's non-linear, right? Because everyone's going to start at the same rating, it's going to take a little while to spread. And then it's going to keep spreading as more people come into the pool, but it's going to spread the most at the start. Meaning, like, there is a bigger gap between 2004 and 2006, and 2006 and 2008, or 2008 and 2010. Each gap between 2 years is going to be smaller. So someone whose streak starts right at the beginning is going to be the most underrated by this metric. And that brings us to Kaus Debonair. Just very good win rate over a 5-year span, playing lots of events. This is a 68-game streak. It doesn't look like it should score that high here, right? I had this in the special run category. We're not going to be able to keep it in the special run category. In fact, it looks too weak. It looks weaker than things I have in the good run category. But it is much longer than these runs, right? Like it looks weaker than D here. I have to have it in the great run category at least because again, I think the rating inflation is quite large at that point. Like normally, this is a pretty small adjustment I'd make. I haven't figured out how to quantify it, so I won't make that adjustment. But normally, it's pretty small. This one's pretty big. And second of all, he just did it so much longer. So I don't know quite where to put him, but it definitely belongs in at least the great run category. I think it's really, really impressive in the time. And what's neat about it is also the whole peak thing doesn't capture it well because he wins a tournament, but then he's not as good for a while. And then he really steps up again in 2008. So this is kind of bracketed by two successes with a down period in between. And like with Broccoli's career or D's or Tezuka, both managed to hold up well enough. I just separated them and had them both look good. But there's a bunch of players with two peaks, Delial too, where there's not a way to show it quite as impressively as it could be because you have these multiple but clearly separated peaks. But Kaus is great, and this is a great run. So I guess we're just like, we're kind of combining, we're going to turn special run. I'm just going to combine that into, we'll see how it looks. I might combine this into top runs. Yeah. Okay. Next up, we have Seto, 2010 to 2022. Generally speaking, this is his post-absolute dominance period and a period where he went in and out of tournaments and still was scoring 72%. You can see this is easily the highest performance we've seen. Yeah, this is a higher category than Chickeny's run. So apologies if Chickeny ends up in a category alone, which is possible. Chickeny right now is the only one with around 2,200 in the second number. Seto clearly stronger, higher win rates, really tough opposition, great run over well over a decade, intermittent tournaments, but also that it stretches over a decade is to say he just whenever he plays, he's really good. You know, he cannot play for a few years, and he is still not just a contender, but a very strong contender to win anything he's in. Next up, we have Kamikaze. This is not the last we will see of Kamikaze. I think all of the top 11 players will have at least either just one run, but incredibly high, or at least two runs that are great or better. And this is the second of Kamikaze's runs. This looks to me pretty comparable to Chickeny's. The win rate's better, definitely easier opposition, and 0610 is a tough time, but you look at the opponents, like Kamikaze in this era had some tough paths. His Squall run is probably the best tournament ever won. Though Seto's Triad Wars 8 run, and a couple Delhi runs, and maybe Sujiro's Eris are in the conversation. But there's a very good case that it's the number one tournament ever won. And but other than that, some soft opposition. And I think that's just going to go here next to Chickeny. Which is to say, God damn, Chickeny's good. Okay, next up we have Sujiro. Now, I talk about Sujiro a lot, about how he's underrated, how I think he might be better than Kamikaze. I am obviously incorrect in that take, and these numbers aren't super hyped on him, though again, that's starting very early, but pretty clearly he comes out just a touch behind Kazi, and Kazi has a whole nother run that's even better than this one. So, okay, point made. But that said, Sujiro's great. This is firmly in the special run category. Sujiro is a legend of the game. And it was nice to see him play a couple games on the return. And, yeah, fun guy, too. All right, next up we have Akiyama. This is one of the few runs that goes through the present. Him having just made, a semifinals and some deep runs. Quarterfinals, finals. I think he's on like a 6-icon streak or something crazy like that. So, he's doing very well for himself of recent. Let's see how it stacks up. Where does current great Akiyama land? And importantly, is Akiyama's current streak from 2014 to today. That includes his victory in Adia. That's the one that was most flattering for him. Does he pass his hated rival Seto? Well, it's pretty close. I mean, it's clearly behind, right? Little higher win percentage, but easier opposition. Comes a hair behind. But I think probably makes it into that top run category with Seto. Right? It's substantially better than Chickanee's. It's also clearly worse than Seto's. Kind of evenly spaced between them. But I'm going to put it here and say Seto gets bragging rights without even including 2008. But also, look at Akiyama's run. Like, if you're performing slightly worse over a decade than Seto performed over a decade, you're doing pretty well for yourself. All right, another interesting one. I cut it badly, I think, the last time I did it, so this one actually moves quite a bit from where I had it. But Vid 2011 to 2014, it's really good. Slightly higher win rate than either Seto or Akiyama. Again, this includes all tournament types. Overall, given the ELO score, I'm going to put it just below Akiyama, but it is in this special runs category. And you can see why Akiyama and Vid are the two active players closest breaking into that top 11 group. There's kind of, I think, say Elite 11, and it might become, Zodiac Brave 13 or something, right? These are the two players. But also Turds. Cookie has just won a tournament. There's a whole bunch knocking at that door. I do think the 11 right now are the clear 11, and I think we'll see that. But these are two players that are, as close as mortals get, right? All right, next up we have Kamikaze's actual best run. And because it's very early, this doesn't rate it as having very difficult opposition. And despite the really high win rate, it comes out almost identical to his previous great run, right? So this is going to land also in the special category, and these are just virtually identical. Kazi maintains, by this measure, a consistent, extraordinarily high level from 2003 to 2010 for a total of, how many games is that? Like 85 games? That's absurd. And again, I think it's underrating him 03 to 05. I think that's better than it looks. Players' ratings hadn't separated much. Ratings go up when they separate. Yeah. This is better than it looks. By this measure, it drops to the special category, but you can see why Kazi is firmly in that big 11. Okay, next up we have Koner. Is this Koner's top run? We've already seen Koner at least a few times. Yeah, this is Koner's 06 to 08 run. And it looks really similar to Kazi. I think Kazi maintained a little longer, right? Koner's second best run we saw just at the top of the good run category, I guess. But very consistent, very long-term, very good player. Yeah, this is looking just a hair better than Kazi's best runs. But keep in mind, Kazi did do it longer. I think, especially given ratings are a little lower in Kazi's time, and that he did it clearly longer. It's hard to have a list that has Koner ahead of Kamikaze overall, but it's close. They look similar in a lot of ways. All right, next up we have Delial's second best peak, and like everything with Delial, he was better than his win percentage, and you can see that once we convert to ratings and look at opposition. Yeah, so this is clearly one of the two best runs we've seen yet. We have a case. What's better, Seto's second best run or Deli's second best run? Note, we've already seen Deli twice before on this list. He's the person to appear the most unique times on the list. What do you think? Now, Seto's rocketed up due to difficulty of opposition. Deli leads by 20 in performance, trails by 15. He is up 7% win percentage, but he maintains it about half as long here. I think I have Seto's run a hair ahead. I think I want to favor Seto's second best run here. But this is to say, Deli has had an extraordinary amount of good peaks, and like if you took away Deli's 14 to 16 and his 07 to 08, which we haven't even gotten to, and he was just relying on his 09 to 12 and his 2013, so like 09 to 2013, you would still have you take away the 5 best years of his life playing, or triple triad playing years of his life. Like, you just chop them. The best runs he had. He's still what? Top 15 player all time? Like, come on, man. All right. Where are we next? We're at Slash of Time. So this is Slash of Time's peak run. I missed a loss in it last time, so it actually is going to drop a bit, which is a shame. I like moving people up more than moving them down. And it does look like this one is pretty similar to the Kazi runs, just like Koner is. Probably lands right between the Kazi runs. Oops. There we go. Yeah. Great run. Firmly on that Koner, Kamikaze, Sujiro, Chickeny level. But actually, I'm pretty impressed that Akiyama and Vid are coming out higher here. It's really hard. Actually, I have two things I want to talk about here. One I was intending to say a little later, but I think we can get to now. But the first one is, when you leave paying attention to some kind of competition, you see this all the time with like basketball fans, right? They cared in the 80s and 90s, and it solidified in their mind like Jordan is number one and Magic and Bird are 2 and 3 in some order. Or maybe they stopped watching in the 60s. I've talked to friends' parents like that, where, it will always be Bill Russell no matter what comes. And they've gone out of paying attention, but like no one could have passed what you saw. And coming back to TTA after having like left in 2012 but was paying less attention for a bit, I didn't really believe in what came after, right? It was kind of, that can't be real in the same way that what I cared about was real. So Vid clearly got great. I mean, he was playing well in 2011-12, but I played him once there in a tournament, and it was not a very good game. So I didn't have a particularly high opinion. And you look at what he did after, it was tremendous. Similarly, it's taken me a while to buy into how good Akiyama is. And I still think I have some difficulty here. Like, it's hard for me to think, yeah, what Akiyama's doing now is slightly better, but in the conversation with players like Koner, Kamikaze, and Slash at their peaks, right? I've been comparing it a lot to Sujiro. By this measure, at least, it's somewhat ahead of all of them, enough that I actually have it in the higher tier. And so is Vid's best run. That actually their strongest times at the game are not just competitive with these top 10 all-time players, but slightly higher peaks. Not maintained it as long, not necessarily the greater careers overall, but actually slightly higher peaks. And that's really impressive, and I'm not sure where I'm going to end up feeling about that, but also good for them. Like, that's great. We want high-level play in the game. Okay, next up we have Cookie's great run. Keep in mind this is an early run, so it's hindered a bit. So the 75% drops off a bit when you look at competition. I think this is one where if you look at the competition, you'll be like, yeah, that should drop off a bit. Sorry about this pop-up thing that keeps coming. It ends up popping down from the top run category, top run, to around, right next to Deli's run. Or, yeah, just ahead of Slash, behind Deli. And I think that might be right. It might be wrong. I wasn't there in 0406. I didn't see the evolution of the game. I don't know how much stronger the present day is than it was then. I think it's entirely believable, especially if you look at Cookie's results following this, that Delial from 2009 to 2012, which is not Deli at his best, is playing at a better level than Cookie was in 2004 to 2006, but the opposition is much tougher, so he's winning 10% less of his games. That, to me, just seems believable. Like, it might not to you. That's where I'm going to put him here for now. Again, the rating inflation thing, you could argue Cookie should be higher there. you should also argue that I'm just not understanding how high the level was then, right? But this actually feels like a kind of correct adjustment to me, which is not to denigrate Cookie here because that's still a tremendous run. And this brings me to the other thing I was going to talk about that I think now would be good to talk about. StarCraft, which I was just talking about a bunch with a friend because he's really into StarCraft, so he was explaining stuff to me, has this term called Bonjwa. Now, if you know about this stuff, I'm probably not going to get it quite right. I've probably talked about it a little before last time he talked to me about this. But it's not just like someone's number one in the world, right? There have been many people who have clearly been number one in the world at some point. It's a player who is so dominant that when they enter a tournament, they might be favorite versus the field. Now, that's really hard in Triple Triad, but like, it doesn't have to quite be favorite for this to make sense. But it's so dominant that like picking someone else to win over them would be strange. They are favorite in every match they play. They are obviously more likely than any other player to win any tournament they enter. It doesn't have to go on for a long time. Usually, Bonjwa's period of dominance in StarCraft, I believe, is like a year and a half. They get past, the game changes. Maybe the periods are even shorter than that. That's like their period at number one, but their period as Bonjwa is shorter. But it's a kind of interesting term. And I think one interesting thing about it is it somewhat is about the mystique, right? Certain players get mystique. And when I run these numbers, and when people have run numbers on the Bonjwas, sometimes it doesn't really agree with the mystique it's saying, but they're not winning quite as much as people thought they were. But they tended to be winning in the big events a lot. But it also, yeah, so part of it is this kind of mystique. And yeah, part of it is just like you're not first among equals. This is just very clearly the best player in the world. Now, I think if we applied this to TTA, oh, there's one other thing, which is from what like I've read and scanned of statistics, it is, I think, really clear that the second most dominant player of all time is Jaedong, a player who clearly put up better win rates than the four Bonjwas that happened before he played. The problem is he landed at the same time as the clear best of these. Now, there's some debate over whether this fifth one counts as a Bonjwa for lots of reasons, but by like the standard definition, of course he does, and he's clearly the most dominant Bonjwa of all, right? The others, year and a half. Him, you could argue it's been like a decade, right? It's so much longer and so much more dominant. He's so clearly the greatest of all time, but also like basically Bonjwa for half StarCraft's history. So that player Flash is absurd, absolutely absurd. But Jaedong, for some of those years, actually won more games against Flash than Flash won against him. Has put up win rates and won titles at rates that are not quite the peak of most of the Bonjwas, but his win rates, he just wasn't quite winning the events in the same way that some Bonjwas were. But the point is, he can't be Bonjwa because Flash was better. But I think Jaedong is number two all time. And I think he's pretty comfortably number two all time. I don't think it's like a close race between him and any of the Bonjwas. Some people who know much more about StarCraft clearly would have him like third and would have like one of the four Bonjwas ahead of him. But, I hope my point makes some sense here. If you look at Triple Triad history, Doc Evil is very clearly a Bonjwa. And there is the case he's the only Bonjwa, but Doc Evil is a Bonjwa. The other player from the early era, as much as I believe looking back and from having seen them play in current eras, that Kamikaze and Sujiro are the next two best players through 2006 or 7. I think Cookie is the other person who is a real case as being the Bonjwa at some point. I'm not sure that's true. People who were there then would have to be like yes or no, because this very much is did they have that mystique? But the impression I have is that Cookie is the only other player of the early era who there's a case that he was a Bonjwa. And that's phenomenal. So as far down as this list as he's fallen relative to that, it will never take away that this is one of the contenders for true Bonjwa status, along with Doc Evil. If we look at the rest of the list, we've mentioned some players that have a case for it, but we've not talked about the eras that they do have that case. So I'm going to not talk more about it yet, but there are other people I think you can argue are Bonjuas in Triple Triad history. There is a case it's just Doc Evil, but I think there's a very clear second person. Not even me. I actually am not sure I ever was one. I'm pretty sure I'm not. But I think there's between 1 and 6. That 6 would include me. 1 and 6, if you include me, I probably have the worst case. I think Cookie is the second worst case of those 6. I think he's probably 5th on claim to being a Bonjwa, but that's really damn good. Okay, the last person that was initially in this category is Yojimbo from 2010 to 2011. This is when he was clearly a great player, but not quite breaking through to winning everything, but he was great. Where does this land him? Well, it's got to be in that top run category. I think it's ahead of Vid, but behind Akiyama. Eyeballing it, that's what it looks like to me. Again, I'm mostly basing this on these numbers, not the others. The last time I did this list, I mostly based it on these numbers. This time I'm mostly basing it on these numbers. I think this lands here. So, for Akiyama, sorry you couldn't beat Seto here, but you did beat one of Yojimbo's runs, and that's pretty good. Alright, so those were what I initially had in the top runs. We are now down to what last time I rated the 8 best runs of all time, and we will do them in reverse order of how I rated them. Here we are getting into people who, if they didn't have this run overlapping with other people, these look like Bonjwa level runs. Maybe I should call this like Bonjwa runs instead of GOAT runs. Maybe that would be fun. Anyways, we'll see. These I counted as elite runs. Let's see if they stand out. We have MC. Now, MC's 2273 here and 2359. We saw people kind of we saw Seto at least getting close to 2250 in that second number. But this is a pretty clear lead. It's only 5 points ahead of Deli in performance, but it's for 50 games instead of 24. I think this is rightly in a different category. We're going to add this under elite runs. I think MC's 2010 to 2012 is tremendous, but I think it very clearly isn't a Bonjwa run because it overlaps with other people who were either close or better. But like, you know, if you're neck and neck with someone and you pull out ahead, that doesn't make you Bonjwa. That makes you number one. You have to be a bunch ahead to be Bonjwa, and this certainly isn't. But this was a great run. From exactly 2010 to exactly 2012, I suspect once you add in Yojimbo's 2012, Yojimbo pulls ahead for the best of that era. But it's really, really good. I had a slightly higher Nightwish, but I think once you adjust for opposition, MC kept beating me, for instance, along with some other people. Nightwish's score drops a bit, still tremendous, but to me it looks like it's at the top of the next category, not quite in the same level as MC's peak. Now, you'll notice Nightwish did it longer, 68 games to 50. And in general, Nightwish's career averages are better than MC. MC did appear previously on the list, but this is to say leading up to it, he was a good but not notable player. Notable, but not like great player. And then he has this run, and then he stops. Nightwish plays at a top level for longer. I think there is a clear case for Nightwish as better than MC overall, but they're very close. Do these belong in different tiers? I think so, because I think this obviously doesn't belong in the same tier as this, right? MC's run is about 50 points better in both than Vid's, but Nightwish's versus Vid's is more in the 25-30 off range, and so I think these can fit in the same tier, even if, Nightwish's is better. And Nightwish and Vid played a few times, and it went both ways. Interesting matchup. I wish I had caught those. But, yeah, I think MC is our only elite run right now. but also Nightwish keeps rising in my estimation when I look at these stats. And I do think I used to have MC over Nightwish overall. In my kind of personal belief of the order, I am now on Nightwish over MC, and that Nightwish is quite close to actually being like sixth or seventh all time. Probably is seventh, but quite close to sixth. Then we have Great Sephiroth, another person who like puts up just these all-time incredible numbers, but happens to overlap with the people who do even better, which makes it even harder, right? Like if you put up the same win rates as someone, but one of you is number two and one of you is number one, a lot of people would go, okay, the guy who is number one is better. I would go, he's doing that win rate while having to play the person who's number one. That's so hard. So I think I have a different instinct in that than a lot of people. A lot of people like time at number one becomes more meaningful. And me, like, if you're putting up the same performances and you had the tougher opposition, of course you're better. But that is the difference I have to a lot of people. That said, it's not super high on Great Sephiroth's run. Yeah. It's 68 games, which is a case to be put over Seto. But I think actually I'm going to drop that down here. That said, I do think Great Sephiroth is stronger than Nightwish or MC. You know, I have him sixth all time, sometimes fifth, depending on my mood. But there's a real case that Nightwish and MC are better. The case for Nightwish is something like he actually ends up putting up higher win percentages than Great Sephiroth. And the case for MC is there's a good case he peaks a little higher. Like, not just very marginally higher like you see here, but like clearly higher. So there's a case for both against Great Sephiroth. Great Sephiroth has more titles, and I do think he was the better player, but it's close. And also, I think he's probably the all-time greatest 2-minute open player. And having something like that added to your resume, I think is nice. Okay. So right now, MC is the only elite run. And in fact, I think he's going to end up as the only elite run. No, that's not true. No, MC's run is actually just going to look very similar to the GOAT runs. So really incredible run by MC. Next up, we have Doc Evil. Now, Doc Evil, it doesn't really know what to do with the fact that he's only played 19 games. Of course, these are absolutely ridiculous scores. Not actually. The 2301, again, I think it should penalize slightly more for the relatively short run. But this isn't actually... I mean, the 2445 is obviously unbelievable. Let's just say go runs. But Doc Evil is Triple Triad's first Bonjwa, one of, say, 2 to 6 Bonjwas, and the greatest 3-tournament run that we've seen in terms of win rate and in terms of going win-win finals. We have not seen the like. We have seen some 3-tournament runs now I think were better given opposition, but it also took the players a lot more tries. Doc Evil had 1 try, and he did that. So that's insane. Next up, we have the billionth appearance of Delial on the list. Now, for what it's worth, I think Delial's run here is substantially better than MC's. I think one thing that happens that's a little interesting is sometimes ELO ratings take a little while to start dropping down. They're slow to get up and they're slow to move down. They can be a little stagnant. Deli was beating a bunch of people whose ratings kept going up, right? He was beating them as they were clearly at the level that their rating took a little while to reach. MC was beating people whose ratings, to some extent, not all, he was beating very, very tough opposition. But I think a bunch of it was people on the downswing whose ratings were a little higher than they should be, while Deli was beating people whose ratings were lower. Also partially because, inflation continued to happen. Now, Deli did this for twice as long as Doc did this. It's pretty hard based on these numbers to put Deli ahead of Doc. In fact, Deli is only very marginally ahead of MC here. So maybe we'll have Deli between them. But I actually think like you wouldn't have to do that much finessing the numbers like for some things that I think are true to move him ahead of Doc here. But this is also to say, oh my god, look at MC's run. Like that MC is in the conversation with Doc and Deli for a best run like this. Absurd. Fantastic. One more thing about MC, his run really lines up well with the start and ends of year. So there's a whole bunch of things going for him, but also unbelievable he shows up this list playing this well. Good for MC. And what we're talking about Bonj was, I think Deli in 08, there's a case he doesn't because Seto is just as good. But from my perspective, as someone who wasn't yet that good at the game, but was reading the forums and was talking with people a bunch, I think Deli hits Bonjwa status and maintains it for a few years, despite 07, 08 being the absolute best for him. But I think Deli is a Bonjwa, and either it goes Doc Evil, Cookie, someone whose name we will be talking about soon, and then Deli, or Doc Evil, that person, then Deli. But I think there was this feeling when Deli entered a tournament that, like, can the field beat him or not? And it was an open question. I think when I first started entering the forums was right at the end of this period, and that's what the community felt like to me. And that very much reads to me as Bonjwa. So I think Deli was a Bonjwa, and quite a good one. Okay, next up we have everyone left has a case to be a Bonjwa. We have Yojimbo's run, and Yojimbo's run is so good. It's like 100% confident he was at least playing at a 2340 level, which is already ahead of what Nightwish performed at, right? That his second number is higher than numbers like this is absurd. This is our clear best run yet. Yojimbo's run here, I think, is absolutely ridiculous. He wins 4 tournaments out of 6. He wins back-to-back tournaments. He ends up, over this period of time, winning 5 or 6 tournaments over a 4-year span. He wins over 80% of his games, and he does it beating just about everyone. And his losses are to people like Delial, Slash of Time, Akiyama, right? And D. D was a kryptonite for him. He also beats D during that period, though, both in a single-player tournament and, as I just learned, looking through stuff for this, in a Rhinoa tournament. If there were only 2 Bonjwas in Triple Triad history, I think it's Doc Evil and this Yojimbo run. Because in 2010-11, Yojimbo was being treated. The thing was, Yojimbo prepared so hard and cared so much. You knew he would do everything to win, be maximizing concentration at all times. It felt like someone where it's like, is there any weakness in the armor? Rather than other people where you want to catch them on a bad day. It felt like he didn't have them in the same way, that he was always prepared. And I think people just reliably, whether or not his results were there yet, because as we saw, his 2010-11 was great. His 2010-11 was great. But Nightwish and MC, I think, were better. I think I was better. I think he wasn't. I think there were, a bunch of players having exceptional years, but I don't think he was above the field. And he was already treated like he was. It was already, this is something special. And it's kind of unlucky he hasn't just won everything yet. And then in 2012-15, he did basically just win everything, or final everything, absolutely everything, and set faraway records for most finals, most semifinals. At the time, he broke Koner's record for most icons, though Delial has since claimed it. I think this is a very clear Bonjwa run, and I think Doc Evil and Yojimbo are the 2 clearest Bonjwas. Really curious if other people, what they think about this. I think Yojimbo and Doc Evil are very, very clear Bonjwas. I think Delial is a Bonjwa. I think Cookie is a Bonjwa. But I also wasn't there for Cookie. I don't know if the mystique was there. And I saw the tail end of Delial, and I saw people continuing to just be like, yeah, he's the favorite in everything. So I'm pretty sure Delial is. I'm very confident Yojimbo is, and I'm very confident Doc Evil is. Not sure on Cookie. My opinion's probably there's three Bonjwas and Cookie is not one, especially because Cookie's period kind of overlaps with some Doc Evil, though Doc only played 3 tournaments. So probably not Cookie, but he does it the next best case. But I would say Doc, Yojimbo, and Deli are 3 Bonjwas. However, the problem for Deli's case is his best period overlaps with Seto's best period, which is, of course, also the problem for Seto, right? If we go back to a stupid basketball analogy, Larry Bird and Magic Johnson play at the same time, which means while I think Magic's better early in the 80s, Bird is better in the middle of the 80s, Magic is better in the end of the 80s. And there are some other players around. Michael Jordan's coming in by the end of the 80s. He joins in the middle of the 80s, but is topping them by the end of the 80s. But I don't think either one could ever be Bonjwa. And that might be the case with Seto and Deli too, but my suspicion is that Seto is an 07 and Deli is an 08. And that, yeah, that they fully deserve to be. Their numbers are clearly and comfortably good enough. Now, earlier I had Seto above Yojimbo. Here, the question is Seto or Doc. Both Doc's numbers are better. Deli did do it a lot longer. I'm gonna put Seto here for now. I think there's a case for like all of these ahead of Doc, but there's also a case for Doc ahead of all of these, right? You know, it really depends how you value things. Today I'm in a mood where I want Seto and Deli to be next to each other because that feels right to me. And I think they are. I think the Bonjwa order goes Doc Evil was the first, Seto was the second, Delial was the third, and Yojimbo was the fourth. And I think there were 4 Bonjwas. I think that's it. Cookie and I have the next best case. Let's do me. This is the last one. I think this is clearly the best run, right? It's by performance rating, it's just as good as Doc, but sustained over a decade, 77 games. This is the number one run. But I think something interesting, and I used to feel jealous about this, but I think when I was peaking in 09, people were impressed. Like I won 3 tournaments in a year that had never been done. But also like people still thought Deli was better. And when I had a little down year in 20 and probably thought Seto was better too, though Deli tended to be the person people talked about. And then in 2010 I thought I was playing great, but I didn't win that much and people thought others were better. And in 2011 I win everything I play and Yojimbo doesn't, and we were voted co-Open Player of the Year, and I felt like, but I performed so much better. But Yojimbo had that mystique in a way I didn't, and then Yojimbo took over. So my 2009 to 11 period, I think I was playing the best triple triad in the world for a 3-year span, but I don't think I was ever Bonjwa, right? I think both it was maybe not by that big a margin. Deli, Seto, Great Sephiroth, Yojimbo, MC, Nightwish are all, and Slash of Time too, actually, it's really important to mention here, are all hitting at the same time. So I think I'm the best, but not by enough, and especially I didn't have the mystique. And then I do okay in 2012 and disappear. And then I come back for the return, and in the return, we can see people's brackets, who they're picking to win tournaments. And while I was the one picked in the first tournament back, I wasn't really picked in the others. And this is totally okay with me. It got under my skin back in 2009, 10, 11 a bit, because I thought, look at what I'm doing. But now I think overall, I've talked about this before. I think I am the GOAT. I think you look at this, I think it's very clear. but I don't actually think I'm a Bonjour. I think I easily could have been. I think at some point from '09 to 11, or some point in the last couple of years, um, I could have been, but I think I happen not to have been, right? And I think I never had that kind of magic that the other four had, and that kind of impression left on other players. So I think I'd love to include myself. You know, again, this doesn't really get under my skin, but I would like feel good including myself. But I think there are four Bonjours in Triple Triad history. I think Doc does it for a 405, about a year span, middle of '04, middle of '05. And maybe because he's playing more tournaments at the time, like more random casual games, maybe it goes longer. I think Seto gets there in '07. I think Delhi gets there in '08. And I think Yojimbo gets there 2012, 13ish. And maybe just 2012 through 15. And I think that's your four Bonjours, and maybe I'm a fifth, and maybe Cookie is a sixth. I think the problem with MC here is just he overlaps too much. And it's the same problem with Nightwish and Great Sephiroth. There are points in the world when obviously everyone knows these are unbelievable players, but and there's points in time when I think very smart, knowledgeable players would have any one of those as by narrowly the best player in the world, but definitely never by enough. And I don't think there's any other point there's a case for someone. So I think there's between 4 and 6 Bonjours, probably just 4, because I think for this Mystique really matters. Yeah, so I'm curious if anyone listens this far, what you think on this. Um, I don't think like Bonjour is the same as greatest of all time. It's not the same as being number one. Someone who is only ever number two could be better than someone who's a Bonjour, right? If Cookie's a Bonjour, like I think MC, Nightwish, Great Sephiroth, this crowd is better than him. So it goes, you know. You get lucky and unlucky when you play. Standards vary over time. But this is our final list here. In general, just as I've said, I think there's a very clear Mount Rushmore. I used to think maybe Doc Evil was not even as good as the fantastic Great Sephiroth or Nightwish, maybe. But I think Doc Evil's got to be fifth. I think it's Yojimbo and I, and then Deli and Seto, and then Doc Evil. And then Great Sephiroth, MC, and Nightwish are pretty close, and I used to think it just was Great Sephiroth, and depends what you look at. But those are pretty close. I think those are 5th through 7th. And then, sorry, 6th through 8th, because Doc is 5th. And then there's Kamikaze, Koner, and Slash, where Kamikaze's probably the best of that group, but it's really close. And then you have a whole bunch looking in. Akiyama, Vid, Chickeny, Sujiro, Cookie, Turds are the main ones. And we'll see where this Turds run goes from here, because that's active. Note Akiyama's is also active. And Seto's, I cut it off because he hasn't played in 2023, but he's about to play TTAC. This is active as well. So there's a whole bunch of interest for this. I think I've talked enough. I think we'll call it here. Really curious. Yeah, let me know if you have any Bonjour thoughts. Like, if there was a moment in time that you felt like, yeah, of course that person was going to win. Because, like, I don't know, maybe Sujiro and Kamikaze had that. Maybe Seto had that before I think he did. Maybe you think, like, basically no one but Doc or no one but Yojimbo had that. I think that's plausible. I would like to know what people think on that, because I think it's kind of interesting. I also think it might vary a little by format, right? If you think of something like tennis, Nadal is obviously like the goat on clay, but also like he is such a huge Bonjour on clay, right? Like he is such a big favorite in any clay tournament he enters that he's like him versus the field is usually not close, right? He's big favorite over the whole field combined. So you might have like a feeling in particular formats that it's a little different. I'd be curious to know that. Or that you think if like randoms were in tournaments, there would have been a clear Bonjour based on that. That would be interesting too. Yeah, it's a fun term to mess around with and see what you come up with. All right. this has been the end of this series. I'm kind of glad to be done with it. It took a while to put together. So kudos to me for putting in the work. Uh, I really didn't know what it was, going to say exactly. Um, and I really tried to pick runs that were most flattering to each player. If, when rechecking it for this last part, I realized, no, this is screwing them over, I would be like, okay, let's remove that part, add in that part, and try to get everyone the best scores I could.